With the release of Turning Red hitting Disney Plus this week, we now have 25 Pixar movies to rank from worst to best. But we're not going to be ranking in your typical ranking style. We're going to be doing it in a tier list style. My actual normal ranking will be coming later this year when Pixar's 26th film, Lightyear, comes out. So do stay tuned to that. Hit that like and subscribe button for that kind of content. I love talking movies. And just remember that my ranking is probably going to be very different than yours. So make sure to leave a comment on what your guys' ranking as well would be. And if you happen to want to be doing a tier list, I'll be linking a link down below to where you can actually make your own and tweet it at me. Let me see it. Other than that, guys, it's time to dive in and do this tier list for all 25 Pixar movies, including Turning Red, right now. Guys, let's have some fun with this. We got some fun little things here, 25 movies to pick from, and this is gonna be fun. So I don't really know how it comes to be when it comes down to Pixar. I love like a majority of their movies, so this is going to be a little bit interesting to see which ones I put elsewhere, and a lot of this will probably come down to rewatchability, classics, and a lot of biasness because it's my list. And so let's start with kind of a sour one, I guess, because a lot of this is actually going to be pretty positive, and that is The Good Dinosaur. I'm going to put The Good Dinosaur in the C category. Now, I actually don't have that much hate towards this movie. I actually really enjoy it for what it is. It could be better. The themes and messages are fine, but the animation is absolutely incredible, and a lot of the dinosaur elements are a lot of fun. This is one of the only Pixar movies that was left in development hell for quite a while, and the fact that it even made it to its surface is quite a big standard. In fact, out of all the Pixar movies that have hit Disney Plus so far, and they shouldn't have, they should be in theaters, The Good Dinosaur of Disney Plus was a thing. This movie would have absolutely premiered on Disney Plus. But again, it's not a bad movie. It's a solid one, but it's not a classic like Pixar has been creating. But let's start and go with a classic, and that is Finding Nemo, which I'm going to put in the S category. For me, Finding Nemo is the quintessential Pixar movie, and there's a lot of quintessential Pixar movies, but it's one of the most iconic ones yet, and one of the most iconic adventures you can possibly go on. It's a movie that I love to pieces, and when you go from every character, even to the minimalistic sub-characters, every single one is memorable, and you can enjoy it for what it is. The Tank Gang, Bruce and his gang of sharks, Crush and Squirt, Marlin, Nemo, Dory, they are all so iconic, and I love this movie with such a high passion. It's one of the most rewatchables, and it did change up animation for the better, because Pixar has been evolving their animation from the beginning, whether it's with the first Toy Story to now Finding Nemo. The most iconic thing about this was the way that they actually created the ocean, the water. It is really iconic, and I love this movie with such a high passion. Which, if we're talking Finding Nemo, let's start with Finding Dory, which is gonna lead me to the C category. This is actually one of my first reviews I ever did. Now, I did two. There's two parts of my channel. There's the Inside Out days, which was actually my original video that I ever made, first one ever on the channel. I hate that video. I actually did a reaction to it. You can find that somewhere. I think I did it when I had like 2,000 subs, but we also have Finding Dory, which was like when I rebooted the channel, I'm like, hey, I'm actually going to take this serious. We did Finding Dory, which I really liked, but over rewatches, it's a movie that I just find myself to be very much a rehash of the original Finding Nemo, but losing out on something is the main sub-characters that I can only really remember, I think, Frank? I don't even think that's his name. It's the octopus, which is really awesome, and I love the animation for him, but the movie's really insane, like the way that they actually like drive a car towards the end of this, and there's like a whole insane car chase. It's weird, and I find Finding Dory to be fine and fun, but not a movie that I like to go back to too often to rewatch. And again, there's a lot of Pixar movies that I love, and there's some that I just feel like could have been better. Which, this is one that I'm going to put in the B category, which if you're talking to my sister, this is her favorite Pixar film of all time, and that's Bug's Life. I like this movie. I think it's really good, and in fact, the more and more I've watched this, the more and more I appreciate it for what it is. I don't think the animation completely holds up, and it honestly probably could have been a little bit better in some of the story writing, but I overall really like this movie. I find it to be a ton of fun with especially the circus bug gang, and there are some fun elements to be had here, but it's a movie that I never find myself, again, latching to rewatch. The reason that it's at a B and not a C is because as I've grown older, I find more appreciation with it, and especially following up Toy Story, the fact that this is the movie they chose to do, there is some fun satirical matters in here. And again, some of the characters are very memorable, especially the circus gang. This is an animated movie that I don't feel like we get enough of, that has some scary elements to it and really much keeps you on edge, say James and the Giant Peach kind of era, but it's a version of a film that we don't get enough of nowadays, and I more appreciate Bug's Life nowadays than I did back in the past. Which, let's talk about a movie that maybe we should more appreciate later down the road, and that is going to be the one, the only... Honestly, I was just kind of picking right now, but it is Luca. Luca's also another one in the B category, which is kind of last year one of my main comfort movies. I just put on the background, have playing, and yell Silenzio Bruno randomly, because the Italian culture is in such effect within this movie, and it's actually a part of the film that I really love. Now, for people who don't know, I'm Italian. My family's Italian, and you know, it's a piece of culture that has always been a part of my life, but never, like, so gravitated to. And Luca made me feel, like, accustomed to some of my culture that I kind of wish my family would more go in line with. But it's also such a small scale movie that reminds me of some of the smaller Studio Ghibli movies, such as My Neighbor Totoro, where nothing really happens. It's just about two kids who, kind of a coming-of-age story for them, who just want to earn money to get a Vespa so they can run away from all their troubles. We have kids. If you've ever had kids, or if you've been a kid, which I'm sure everyone has at one point in time, you'll remember a part of time where you did want to run away or do something of that nature, something crazy, but something so small scale in terms. And I love how Luca really much gravitated to that. And I think a lot of the main characters in here are truly magical, and I loved it overall for that. Thankfully for that, I love Luca for what it is, and it's time to jump into the next movie, which the next one, let's jump into Monsters University, which is an underrated movie that I'm going to put in the C category. Now, a lot of you guys might be thinking, but Zach, didn't you just say you really, really like that movie? You're right. So I'm actually going to move it into the B category because I'm an idiot. I really enjoy Monsters University for what it is, but it is not the classic that the original Monsters, Inc. is. It's easily one of the funniest Pixar movies we've ever gotten. In fact, it's a college comedy, which is crazy to think that Pixar did this. And that's what I love about Pixar, is they do a lot of movies like this that are maybe sometimes more for adults but kids can still watch. And Monsters University has a lot of good things of, like, maybe that rival, maybe that person you don't like could eventually become one of your best friends one day. I've certainly had that before in my life. There's people that I don't like that I'm now really close friends with, or really just close with in general. Monsters University dives into that very wholeheartedly, but also what I wish it would have done, which could have easily gone into the A or S category to make it even a better movie, is if it had an emotional crux to it. This is the one Pixar movie that doesn't actually bring emotion to me. Well, one of the main ones. But it's a movie that, it's like, out of all the ones that I love, or the ones that I really, really like, this is again that one that I don't love because of the emotionality it doesn't bring to me. If they would have had a scene between Mike and Sully at the very end telling Boo before she goes off to her first day of college, and they were reliving this, tears streaming down my face, would have hit me in the gut right away, and I would have really, really come to love this movie and probably appreciate it more and more on each rewatch. But since it didn't do that, I don't feel much emotion towards this. I just have a lot of fun with this one as well. Which, speaking about fun, let's talk about a newer one as well, which is Onward. Another one that I'm going to place in the B category because I think Onward is so underrated. Many people will probably place it in the C or the D category, but there's something special about Onward, whether it's the fantasy world that we have inside this movie, whether it's, of course, the voice talents between Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, and you can really much believe as them as brothers. I love them as a duo. While as much as I love the fantasy element, it's the father-son story here that really broke me. And speaking about something that's really fun, but bringing an emotional element to it, Onward does this and more. I want to revisit this world, dive into more of the fantastical elements, but I also want to revisit it with these characters in particular. And I can't believe how emotional this film actually got me to be. I think a lot of you guys will find this movie to be quite underrated. And for me, that's kind of where I find it to be. It's not one of the greatest Pixar movies, but it's one that really swells within its emotions and just its fun road trip vibe that it has. It's different than what Pixar has done before. And it might feel generic in certain avenues and certain particular elements that kind of remind me of Shrek, just not as well done. But for me, I think this is a great Pixar movie. A lot that people should really check this one out if you haven't yet. Talking about next, let's go to the bottom of the barrel, which is, you know, it's tough because for me, Cars 2 could easily be an F movie. But I also don't think it's like that bad. It's just a D for me. And for you guys to know, there will be no Fs in this category or for Pixar because Cars 2 is just a fine dandy movie that I don't ever really care to rewatch. It's a movie that I've watched like 3 times, and each time I just feel the exact same way about it. Cool. That's it. I don't care really much. The animation's pretty cool. The perspective to go to Tow Mater was kind of a weird idea and more of a spin-off than anything, and it doesn't really work. In the short terms of Tow Mater, those work, if you've ever seen the short stories, but in this scale, it does not. And if they would have focused more on Lightning McQueen, maybe this one would have been good again, but it just doesn't feel like there's any moral message. It feels like this was a contractual like type of thing to like, hey, let's make this movie and let's make toys and sell toys so people will buy more Cars toys, since it's like $1 billion toy franchise thing. And Cars 2 feels that way. Like, it just feels like it was churned out, and this was kind of the beginning of the fall for Pixar for me for a little bit, where a lot of their movies weren't really resonating with me until Inside Out, which we'll talk about very soon. I don't really like Cars 2. I don't think it's really rewatchable, and if you're going to watch the Cars movies, you could literally skip this one and just watch Cars 1 and Cars 3, and that's it. Like you do not need to watch this movie for any of that to make sense. There's some fun elements, but it's nothing really special in there. Which, let's just finish out the Cars movies. Cars 1 is going to come in the C category. A movie that is really, really good, and I like it, but it's one of the ones I don't rewatch too often, and a lot of that just comes down to, I don't know. I just feel like there's bigger Pixar movies and better ones that I would rather revisit nowadays. Lightning McQueen, Owen Wilson kills it in this role, and I'm sure eventually we'll probably get another Cars movie. And the Route 66 crew, in the capacity that they were used, was great. The message in here of being more humble is awesome and very important for kids to understand. But out of all the Pixar movies up until this point, like if you were just going from the years on, this is the one that did not feel, how would you say, actually like how I say Pixar makes a lot of movies for adults and kids can watch. Cars 1 is kind of one of the ones that kids could really much love, but adults really wouldn't be that satisfied with. And ending on Cars 3, I'm going to put Cars 3 also in the C category. Really much kind of diving into more of the same morals and messages as the first one, just not done as well. Like, it kind of lingers between C and D, but the only reason it falters into the C is because of the new character, Cruz Ramirez, who I think is very well done. I'd also add in that the animation in this movie is absolutely stellar, and overall, again, enjoyable. I just don't really care to ever rewatch this one too much. And adding in another context, this is the only Pixar movie, Cars 3 is the only Pixar movie I do not own on Blu-ray. Make that as what you will. I refuse to spend over $10 for this movie. I'm sure many of you guys are like, but wait, doesn't he have Cars 2? Yes, I own Cars 2 because it was $5, and I have an OCD thing, but I refuse to spend any more than $10 on Cars 3. Moving up, let's go to Inside Out, because we did mention Inside Out, and I do want to say Inside Out for me lingers between an S and an A category, but I'm going to put it in the A category because I feel like S's is more for classic Pixar movies for me. Ones that I hone in either on a major biasness that I think it will be a classic Pixar film one day, or whether it is just a great Pixar movie. Inside Out was the movie that kind of reminded me why Pixar is the best animated studio of all time. Because again, leading up to this, they didn't really have the best track record. And after Inside Out, I'm like, give me whatever they got next. And I feel like after Inside Out, of course, we got Good Dinosaur, which I didn't love, but after that, it feels like they kind of started going back on this upheaval, especially over the last couple of years. And I love Inside Out. This is a movie that I feel like really dives into what it means to be a kid and will make adults understand the feelings that we all understand and feel inside of us. And one of the biggest things is that reminder that it's okay to still be a kid and it's okay to feel differently than how you're feeling with frustrations of, say, moving or losing your friends or losing someone. And it also brings back the whole point of it that we've all had an imaginary friend at one point in time, even if it wasn't for that big part of our lives. Bing Bong, everything in there was so emotional and really hit me to my core. And I love what Inside Out does and what it says for its morals, its messages, and everything in that nature. And I really love this movie. It is a movie that I don't revisit too often, but every time I do, I just be absolutely delighted. And it's one of those movies that I'm like, I always want to rewatch it, especially if I get time to, but then I end up faltering towards a different Pixar movie, which we'll talk about very soon. I think that's where we kind of should go to maybe one of my classic movies, which is Toy Story. If you don't know, Toy Story obviously has to be in the S tier for me, because not just for the fact that it changed the 3D animation game, but the fact is it is my favorite Pixar film of all time. It's my favorite movie of all time. I love Toy Story. It's my favorite franchise of all time, which might be a spoiler for the rest of the franchise, but I love Toy Story. And the first one, really each movie kind of comes into a phase of my life that I really needed it at an important time. When the first Toy Story, when I was becoming very much attached to it, my sister was becoming born into my life. And just like Woody, someone interrupted his entire life, and that jealousy happens to ensue. Toy Story taught me not to be jealous and maybe be appreciative of what my sister was going to bring to my life. As a friend that maybe even though we argue at times, it'll be okay. Toy Story, it's freaking genius, and if you don't agree with me, I guess that's okay. I'll have to live with it. But let's move on to Walle, which is another film that I'm actually going to put in the A category. Now, for a while, I didn't love Walle. I found it to just be like, I like it a lot. I love the vibes. I love the Walle and Eva relationship and some of the other robots. But it just became that movie where it's like, oh yeah, this is what's going to happen to humans one day. But as the more and more I've gotten into film, the more and more I've kind of understood what this movie is about. And in fact, Pixar pretty much made a complete silent movie within the first hour of this. And I actually kind of wish they would have gone more further with that instead of kind of going into the stuff within space, which I think keeps it from being in the S category for me, even if I do like the messages and themes that it has about our Earth and the post-apocalyptic nature that it was left in. Wally's an important movie because not just because of the animation, the way that it really much redefined space at the time for animation, but also because of the relationship between Walle and Eva. There's a lot of important things in there and just something sweet about them too. You know, it makes me believe in love, guys. It makes me believe in love. Love, love, love Walle. Almost into the S category. Next up, let's go Brave. Now, I'm going to put Brave in the C category as well. I just... Brave is like the things of two worlds. It's very generic Pixar, but it's also very unique Pixar. I love Meredith as a character, and I think she's one of the coolest Pixar characters that we've gotten yet. But on the other hand, the story that they gave her really much doesn't flesh out too well in the second and third act when the bear and the spells all kind of come to be. I like this whole thing of, you know, you may grow up and your parents might want you to be one thing, but you don't want to be that one thing. And I like that because that still happens to today's standards. I have plenty of friends where it's like, oh yeah, I can't really do that because my parents want me to do this with my life. But I'm like, but you have such a high passion for this in particular. And I feel like that Brave loses that detection from that all, and I wish it would have dove into that a little bit deeper because the back half just feels very generic. It's not a movie I care to ever really rewatch, but it's an enjoyable one for what it is. Which, let's lead into the next one, and I'm debating, should I do Turning Red next? Nah, let's do Up next. Up is in my B category. Now, I think if you just give me the first 10 minutes of Up, this is the best Pixar film they've ever made. Even going over Toy Story, I think the first 10 minutes is the best opening to any film ever made. Like, it's up there with the Dark Knight's opening. And I love, love, love what Pixar did with Up. But really much when it comes down to the villains and the dogs at the ending, that's where it kind of loses my luster. And I don't really care to rewatch this movie all too often because the third act is not for me. The score is impeccable. It is amazing. I love Russell. I love Carl. I love Doug. I love every character in here. I love the messaging and the themes in here. And I just overall adore this movie to pieces besides that third act. It's such a small nitpick. But if you could just give me the first two acts, I love it. I love the adventure that go on here and how important it is. And, you know, I love everything in there. I just want to love the third act, though. It's hard for me to describe. It's just one of those movies that I think is like near perfect. But I wish it was like the third act was just executed a tiny bit better. But again, I know a lot of people love Up, and I totally understand why. Next up, let's do The Incredibles 2, which is going to go, weirdly enough, in my C category, even though I think this is a great movie. Now, the way that I do the grading, it doesn't mean that that's like what I would grade the movie, just so you know, because Incredibles 2, I would probably still give like a B+ to. But for me, it's again one of those movies that I love The Incredibles. The first one, which, again, we'll talk about in a second, is one of the best movies I've ever watched in my entire life. It'll probably spoil where I'm going to put it on this list. So Incredibles 2 I was very excited for, and I think a lot of the elements, all the characters are retained in such a way. I love that Mrs. Incredibles is the main character in here. I love that Bob has to stay home with the kids and help them with their homework or take care of Jack, which is hilarious. And the animation is amazing. I love, love, love what Brad Bird decided to do with this movie. But the villain is very, very obvious. I don't love all the other heroes that they kind of added in here. It feels like they were trying to set up something else that was never really set up because it doesn't seem like we're getting a third movie or a spin-off on Disney+, which is kind of insane to think that we're not going to. And it's a movie that I enjoy, but if I'm going to watch one of the Incredibles movies, I remember I tried debating, I'll watch Incredibles 2 this time, and I ended up just stopping at like 30 minutes in and just going back and rewatching the first one, because I think the first one is perfect, which, let's talk about the first one. The first one is in the S tier. This is, again, I used to work at a place called Amazing Jake's in Arizona, where it would be like, I was a busser, and it was like arcade food, but I was always in the movie room where you could watch movies and like eat your food and stuff, but I would always have to clean in that room, and there was always the main movie I'd put on. I would put it on all the time because there was only like 6 movies to pick from, and one of them was The Incredibles, and I would put that in there so I could watch it, and it was the only movie I never got annoyed of. Now if Toy Story was the option, I probably would have picked Toy Story, but it wasn't. But not Finding Nemo, Incredibles was that one that I could rewatch endlessly for an 8-hour shift and never get bored of it, and I still love this movie to the date. So that is why it is in the S tier. So yes. Next up, let's do another Toy Story movie, and I'm going to go a little bit reverse. We're going to do the last one, which is Toy Story 4, which, sorry, it's an S tier. I don't care what anyone says, this movie is perfect to me. I understand if you don't want to agree with me, whatever, that's fine. But as an epilogue to the entire Toy Story franchise, this movie hit every single level for me and more. These Toy Story movies, like I mentioned, have hit me in a spot when I needed them most. And Toy Story 4 hit me because Woody at this point doesn't know. He's being depressed. He doesn't know what his next chapter in his life should be. And then he meets Bo Peep and it changes his whole life forever. He falls in love. And what Toy Story 3 reminds us is that even if our friends go in a different direction, and while we might miss them, we know what is best for them, and we will continue on in our lives. And that's what Toy Story 4 shows, and elevates that message and goes next forward, letting Woody go on with his life in a more happy manner, to where his friends are going to remember him for life, and maybe eventually they'll team back up and come back together. I don't think we'll get another Toy Story movie, but I'm probably wrong. We're getting Lightyear. It's a new, refreshing way, hopefully, to reinvent the franchise, but love Toy Story 4 with such a high passion, and I love the messaging that it has for it and how important it is. Plus, Duke Kaboom, Canada's greatest stuntman, Ducky, Bunny, all the new characters are really important for this. And I like that there's really no antagonist to this at all. Really much the antagonist, while maybe Gabby, it is Woody's feelings. Forky being added, there's just so much love that I have for this movie, and it is the perfect epilogue to the franchise. Moving forward, let's do Coco next, and I'm going to do Coco in the A category. I love this movie. The music, the musical swellings, all sorts of things like that, bringing me and transporting me into a culture that I've never been familiar with, but giving me so much love for this but this movie. I love it. It made me want to hug my grandma right afterwards and be like, please don't leave me, because Coco gives you that feeling. It makes you like respect your ancestors and the people who had come before you, and also understanding your culture and what it is. Now, while I've never been a part of the Hispanic culture, it's something that I really want to be invested in. And I think focusing on the Day of the Dead could have been a very depressive manner, but the way that Coco infuses such sweet, charming delightfulness, while also that emotionality, there's something important to it all, and the music is so perfect and really much important to the entire story. Plus, the way that they created the whole Land of the Dead was impressive. Love Coco. Hope we get another film like this very soon. Let's talk about the most underrated movie of Pixar's generation. That's Ratatouille. Ratatouille deserves to be in the S tier because it is the most underrated movie, but it's also an important one to not judge a book by its cover, but to also follow your dreams once again. This is kind of what Brave was trying to do, but Ratatouille did it in spades. The character of Remy and as well as Linguini is a perfect match made in heaven, and their duality is so important to the story. I love Ratatouille. There's not a lot that I can personally say about this one, but it's one of the ones that every time I go back to rewatch it, I just sit there, I'm like, God damn, this movie's perfect. Why does no one talk about this? Like, this should be a lot of people's favorites Pixar movies of all time, and it certainly is one of my favorites. But speaking about a duo that is inseparable, it is Monsters, Inc., another S tier for this list, and I love the buddying duo of Mike and Sully. They are so wonderful with one another, and they are two characters that I love coming back to revisit with one another. Like I said with Monsters University, I really enjoy it, but I want that emotional element to it. But the relationship between Sully and Boo and that goodbye is still hard-hitting to today, but as well as kind of focusing in on the monsters that hide in your closets and under the bed. Monsters, Inc. plays with that element into such a fun fashion, and I can't get enough of this film. Now, we got 4 left to pick, guys. Soul, Toy Story 2, Toy Story 3, and Turning Red. Now, some of these might be obvious, some of them might not be. All my reviews are on the channel for actually these movies, but I do want to give a mention and a shout out, guys. Thank you so much again for watching this. Make sure if you do want to do your own tier list and tweet it out at me, check out the link down below, as well as make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, share this video, comment down below your just ranking if you just want to rank all 25 yourselves. I will be doing an actual ranking video later this year when Lightyear comes out, but I'm really happy to have you guys here, and just in general, I feel very lucky. So thank you so much again for watching this. Let's dive back into this list. And next up, we're going to do Soul, which I think Soul is an A category. Now, Soul is my favorite movie of 2020. it really much tells you what the meaning of life is, and really much is, sometimes you'll think like, oh, this is my purpose in this world. Then you find out, no, it's not. My actual purpose is this. It dives into so many different things of the meaning of life, what your purpose should be in this world. And I found it to be so impressive. Now, the reason it's not in the S tier yet, because I really much went back and forth on deciding if I was going to do when I was doing like a rough draft of this, it's because it's not a classic movie yet. It's a great movie, actually an amazing movie, that I have only seen about 4 or 5 times. Where the top S movies, I've seen maybe over 50 times now. And I think it's very important to say that, because I think a lot of people do love Soul, and I know some people might find it to be overrated, but for me, it just hit me in an emotional crux, and it feels like the spiritual sequel to Inside Out, both of those making such a great double feature, and Soul becoming one of the most important Pixar movies yet. Toy Story 2. A very important movie because it was supposed to be a direct-to-home video, and this one's in the S tier because sometimes it goes back and forth. Sometimes this is my favorite Toy Story film of all time. The adventure that Buzz has trying to go and save Woody. Woody finding out about his past and who he actually is. There's so many deep diving elements in there that I find really much Toy Story 2 to be such an important aspect of my life. The other great thing about this is I feel like this is the Toy Story movie that we actually got a lot of development between every single one of the side characters, which is one of the things that actually brings the entire Toy Story franchise to life. The score, the sweeping, the awesome epicness that we get in here, plus everything. It kind of feels like an Indiana Jones adventure, just on the level of toys. Toy Story 2 is a classic for me, and the fact that this was going to be a direct-to-video until they all noticed, no, this movie's great, we need to put it in theaters. Thank God they did. Which now brings me, let's just finish out Toy Story 3, which we know it's going to be. It's going to be in the S tier. This is a movie that, again, at the time, I really much needed it, and I love how this is kind of their goodbye to Andy, but as well as the importance of everything leading up to these characters. Lotso is a very formidable foe. The entire daycare is a very interesting aspect, and I overall just love Toy Story 3 and everything that it needs to be said and had inside its complex nature. This is a reason, there's a reason that it was nominated for Best Picture, and there's a reason that a lot of people hail this as being one of the best endings to a trilogy ever. I still say it is the best ending to a trilogy ever, and then we get a great epilogue to really much conclude everything of its nature, because epilogues can be great, and that's what Toy Story 4 is, and Toy Story 3 is awesome as well. But guys, the last movie we have to talk about is Turning Red. Where am I going to place this? Now, I did do a review of this, and a lot of you guys might be expecting me to put it in my A category, but like I mentioned, A does not mean that is the grade I would give it. So I'm going to put Turning Red currently in my B category. I've only seen it once, and that one time was enough for me to go, this is one of the great Pixar movies of our time. It's a movie that I really much enjoy, and almost above all the others that I feel like is very important. It's different than what Pixar has been doing, and Domee, she as a director, really much puts her stamp on this, and I hope she continues to stick around at Pixar or maybe go to another studio. She did the short film Bao, which was really impressive, but there's something about Turning Red in the way that she creates such a coming-of-age story that we haven't seen before yet. Imagine 8th Grade, yes, that film by Bo Burnham, that brilliant film mixed with Lady Bird. That's the coming-of-age story we get here about puberty with this Mei Lee girl not really knowing how to control it. So instead, they use a metaphor for her turning into a giant red panda, which is hilarious. And the music in here is great, the relationship between friends and family, and the way that maybe adults should kind of understand how kids are going through, and maybe kids can understand, hey, I could suck a little bit less. I really, really, really loved Turning Red, and I was actually quite surprised with how amazing this movie was. It looked good, but I didn't expect it to be that good. And that is going to be my tier list for you guys for Pixar right now. We have S through D, no Fs on this one. You can take that view up as it is right now, and I hope you guys do enjoy this list overall. I find it to be a lot of fun doing these tier lists, and I have fun doing it, but I also want to show you my current Pixar ranking as well as a Letterboxd, so if you want to follow me along, maybe this will change up around. Currently, if I was to cheat, 1 through 4 would be Toy Story 1, 2, 3, and 4, but being a little bit fair, this is currently what my ranking is. As you can see, I hope you have fun with it. But again, this is my tier list. I had fun with you guys talking about this. Thank you so much again for watching, and make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on your way out so you guys don't miss out on movies and TV news, reviews, and all sorts of reactions and rankings over here on a daily basis. I appreciate each and every one of you guys, and of course, until next time, stay clean.